Hi, I'm Tyler.
And I'm Lisa, and today we're going to do some practice problems on the different types of market structures.
And remember, our language notation might be different than your professor's, so check that before turning in your homeworks. So here we have a question about profit maximizing. And the profit maximizing quantity is basically that at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now, I'm not just going to tell you the answer, but I'm going to explain it. So if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, it means that the revenue that you're getting from producing that last unit is greater than the costs. And generally, as you increase units, marginal cost goes up and marginal revenue goes down. And what you want to do is make it to where they're equal so that you're exhausting all the possible opportunity for profit there. And so if like in A, marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, there's still money to be made by increasing production to the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And then in C, if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, you're losing money on that last unit you made, and you're going to want to decrease production because you're losing money. You want to make sure you're not losing money, and so that's not profit maximizing. And D, marginal revenue and marginal cost have nothing to do with where a firm should produce. That's not right at all. So it's B. Alright, so if economic profits are greater than zero in a perfectly competitive firm, we would expect what? So what characterizes perfect competition is that anybody can enter or exit the market and make a product of the exact same quality as everybody else. So think about, it's usually agricultural goods, so anybody can plant some corn and it'll be good enough corn to eat. So if economic profits are greater than zero, what will happen is that there's profit to be made in this industry, so people will enter the market and start planting corn, if that's what we want to talk about. So the answer is A, and then what will happen is they'll enter the market to eat up some of that new profit, and then eventually the profits will go down to zero, and the price will be at the minimum of average total cost. And I can draw this out actually. So what happens when firms leave markets is that the supply changes. And so if firms enter the market, supply goes up because there's more firms now producing this quantity, or this good, and the price goes down and the quantity goes up. And what the important part is that the price goes down, and what we want is to get to the point where this price is where the minimum of the firm's average total cost curve is. And so see, if we're at a price up here, there's positive profits being made. And so what happens is firms enter the market, supply curve shifts, and the price goes down to the minimum of the ATC. So that's why A is the right answer. So let's look at the other ones. B, firms will leave the market. Well, if firms leave the market here, the price goes even higher, and there's even more profits being made. So that's not going to happen. Definitely making a profit, which it says in C, is not true, because one of the basic characteristics of perfectly competitive firms is that there is no profit in the long run because there's free entry and exit. And should not be producing an output level of 200. We don't have any statistics about the, we don't know anything about the output level, so we can't say anything about that. So yeah, A is the right answer. So this one asks a similar question about a monopoly though. So if economic profits are greater than zero in monopoly, we would expect what? So if a monopoly, one thing that characterizes it is that there's not free entry and exit, and one of the most important things is that people can't just jump in and enter a market where there's a monopoly, either because it's too expensive to get the equipment to make it, or they have a patent maybe. Either way, the whole idea of monopoly is that they can charge a higher price because no one else can come into their firm and undercut their price, basically. So firms can't enter and exit the market, so A and B are not right. Industry output to rise, that's not right because they're going to be, a monopoly will always produce at its maximum profit maximizing quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and so output won't rise because they want to stay at this quantity no matter what. And so D says nothing, and that's the right answer because monopolies can make profit in the long run, unlike perfect competition, and they're perfectly happy with that, and that's just how it goes in the long run. So the answer is D. Nothing happens. Alright, so back to perfect competition. Like we said, in the long run, there's going to be zero economic profits. And that is characterized, here's the supply and demand graph for the market, and here's the price in perfect competition. And what this long run is it means that the price is the perfect competition price, and that is where there's the minimum of ATC, and for perfect competition, this price line at P essentially is the demand curve that they face, which is also the average revenue curve and is also the marginal revenue curve, because no matter how many you sell, the revenue that you're going to get from selling each one of those units is always going to be price P because they are price takers, which is characteristic of perfectly competitive market. And so the demand curve is the average revenue and marginal cost or marginal revenue curve, so they're going to be producing at this point. And yeah, so that's essentially what A says, is that each firm faces a horizontal demand curve where demand equals marginal revenue equals average revenue equals the minimum of ATC. That's all at this point right here because they are price takers. So A is the right answer. Let's look at some of the other ones. So B, they face a demand curve that's downward sloping because they're price searchers. That's not true. In perfect competition, you take the market price. So B is not right. Choosing a profit maximizing quantity where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. Well, there's a couple things wrong with this. The profit maximizing quantity is not where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. It's where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And they are maximizing their profit here. So C is not right. And D says that they face a marginal revenue curve exactly equal to the demand curve. That's right, but it's not the best description. So their marginal revenue curve is their demand curve, but it's also the average revenue curve, and it equals minimum average total cost. So A is the best answer here. Alright, so this one is another monopoly question, and it says that for a straight line downward sloping demand curve, marginal revenue lies below the demand curve for the monopolist. That's just the basic monopoly graph, characterized by a marginal revenue curve that is less than the demand curve. So why is this, that the marginal revenue curve is lower than the demand curve? And so when they're selling at a price up here, to increase their quantity and then lower the price, they have to lower the price on every single good. So they're getting less revenue on every good that they've sold thus far, and therefore their marginal revenue goes down as they increase quantity. So that looks like B. We can say that B is the right answer. So let's look at A. Price is less than marginal revenue. It's actually greater than marginal revenue, so A is not right. The marginal revenue curve is above the demand curve. That's just not right, and it said the exact opposite in the prompt for the question. So C is not right, and none of the above is wrong because B is right. So B is the right answer here. Alright, so back to marginal revenue and marginal cost. So we saw earlier in number 1, I believe, that we want marginal revenue to equal marginal cost. So if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, what we said is that there's still profit to be made. You're making money when you produce another unit, and you want to be where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, you're going to want to increase production to drive them down to each other, because marginal revenue decreases when you increase production and marginal cost increases when you increase production. So that's answer B. That's the right one. So A, the firm will decrease production. No, decreasing production would make marginal revenue further exceed marginal cost. C, they won't change production. They will, because the profit maximizing quantity is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. They're going to increase production to get that. And D, we actually don't need another for any additional information. So B is the right answer here.
Okay, so for this problem it says, why does a monopolist face the market demand curve? So you have four options. So A, presence of large number of substitutes. So in this case, A is wrong because since it's a monopolist, so in this case there's only one firm in the market, which means that there wouldn't be any substitutes because only one firm is making the product. So A isn't right. So then B, presence of large number of buyers in the market. This could be true, but it's not answering the question of why do they face the market demand curve. So that's not right. So then now we look at C, and C says barred entry of any new firms into the market. And in this case, if you think about it, since it's a monopoly, this means that there's only one firm in the market, which means that there is barred entry of new firms in the market, which gives them the reason why they face the market demand curve. So C is correct, but D is wrong because even though, yes, these firms do produce a homogeneous product, again, it's not the reason why they face this market demand curve. So in this case, the answer is C. Yeah, compared with a perfectly competitive market with similar cost conditions, a monopolist will have. So this question is trying to get you to analyze the difference between a perfectly competitive market and a monopoly. So as you might have learned, this is the graph for a monopoly, and you have marginal revenue, demand, marginal cost. And so in a monopoly or a monopolist market, normally you produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, and you bring it up to determine price. You bring it up to demand to determine price. So this gives you the price and quantity for a monopoly. So again, in a perfect competition, well, it won't be exact since we're using a monopoly graph here, but in a perfect market, they still will produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. But if you recall a perfect competition market, price and marginal revenue and demand are all this straight line curve. So in this graph now, where you would find that point is you would assume this demand would be also marginal revenue and price, and you'd go where this now meets marginal cost, which is at this point, giving you a lower price and a greater output. So to go back to the question now, what is the difference between a perfectly competitive market and a monopoly? Well, in this case, they're producing a lower quantity but charging a higher price. Therefore, the answer is D.
Okay, so a monopolistically competitive firm's demand curve slopes downward because A says that there's a large number of firms in the market. That might be true. In fact, that is true in a monopolistically competitive market. But the number of firms affects the supply curve, not the demand curve, so that's not why the demand curve slopes downward. The number of firms doesn't really have anything to do with the demand curve that any firm faces. B says that the firm sells a standardized product. One of the definitions of a monopolistic competitive market is that they are all slightly differentiated products. So they may be the same thing, so I like to think about it as coffee. So there's Starbucks, there's Dunkin' Donuts, you can get it at Circle K, wherever. It's all coffee, but people prefer one over the other. They're not all exactly the same. C says that a differentiated product gives some firms some monopoly power. And C is the right answer. And that's because, like I said, that products are slightly differentiated. So some people would never drink Dunkin' Donuts coffee and would only drink Starbucks coffee, even though it's all coffee. But what that does is it gives the firm, individual firms such as Starbucks, they don't have to take just like the market price for coffee. There's no set market price for coffee. They get to kind of set their own prices based on the individual demands for their product, which is not a flat line like it is in perfectly competitive. So C is the right answer. Let's look at D. The firm has complete knowledge of market information. Usually they don't, and even if they did, it wouldn't really have anything to do with the demand curve. It would, again, be a supply side. And so, yeah, the answer is C.
So in this problem it says, in monopolistically competitive markets, advertising by firms is used, and then A, as a means of product differentiation. Well, A is true because if you think about like Pepsi and Coke, right? They both have like very different brands, and that's due to marketing, even though the product like deep down is like pretty similar. So A is true. And then B, to increase the demand for a firm's product. Well, that's also true, because that's what advertising does. Like, you put out these ads to get people interested in your product and convince them that, like, why should they buy your product? So that's what advertising does. And then C, to convince consumers to reduce consumption of rival firms' products and increase consumption of their firm's products. And that is also true, because the goal of advertising is to say why theirs is better and why you should buy it, because then that would increase their profits and, like, they would have more control of the market. So the answer for this one is D, all of the above.
Alright, so we have another monopolistically competitive market question. So, assume that a monopolistically competitive firm is earning positive economic profits. So in the long run, what happens? So, unlike a monopoly, there's no barriers to entry in a monopolistically competitive market. So when there's positive economic products to be made, like in a competitive market, firms will enter the market to try and soak up some of that profit, basically. So what happens is that firms, in the long run, firms will enter the market, and then what that means for a monopolistically competitive firm is that their individual firm's demand curve, so back to the coffee example, let's say this is Starbucks. So say there's some new trendy coffee place like Starbucks. Basically what's going to happen is people are going to be less likely to demand from Starbucks because there's more substitutes, basically. And so their demand curve shifts in, decreases, shifts in to the left, like as shown in the picture. With as far as elasticity goes, is that there's more substitutes, there's more options for these people to choose from. They're going to be less inclined to only purchase from one. And so what happens is that the demand curve becomes more elastic because each consumer has more variety to choose from, basically. And so we look at the answers, we can see that C reflects that competition will cause the demand curve to become more elastic, as it did with the blue one here, and shift to the left because there's less market share that each individual firm has in this market in the long run.
So for this problem, now we're dealing with oligopolies, and this one asks, an oligopoly market structure is characterized by which of the following? So a good example that I like to use for oligopolies would be the cell phone companies, right? There's AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and then from there, like Sprint, it becomes like less and less. So with A, the presence of a standardized product, that one's true, because if you think about a phone company, you can still buy your iPhones or flip phones or whatever it may be, and like you can still call and text people. So overall, like, there's a standardized product, so that's true. So B, the presence of a few dominant firms or one primary firm with many small firms, and that right there is the definition of an oligopoly, so that's true. C, the interdependence of firms. This one is also true, because if you think about a phone company or any other oligopoly for that matter, if one firm makes a big change, it has a huge effect on the rest of the market because there are so few. And then finally, D, barriers to entry. This is true, and this can be true for a lot of reasons. Be high cost in the sense of like a cell phone company. You can only put up so many cell phone towers, so that would technically be a barrier to entry. So for this question, E would be the correct answer because it's all of the above. Yeah.
Alright, so I hope that helped. If you have any other questions, leave a comment on the video or post in the discussion on the YouTube channel, or you can come to the tutoring center at BA211. Thanks.